Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and welcome to the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode.
Today, I am so happy to welcome Mike Mancini and Bob Jennings from Hydro University as my expert guests. I go way back with Hydro, and I've known these guys for a long time, and we're going to have a really fun conversation today. But first, I want to tell you a little bit about their background. So Mike Mancini started his career in 1974 at Ingersoll Rand designing pumps for the U.S. Navy, SSN 688, and Trident submarine program. He was vice president of worldwide aftermarket services for Ingersoll Dresser Pumps. Mike went into business as an independent pump consultant in 2003. He worked with many customers in varied markets in the training of personnel, specification development, root cause analysis, and strategic planning and process improvement. Mike is now president of Total Solutions for Hydro Inc. His job responsibilities mirror his consulting work, supporting customers in reducing their total cost of pump operation. Now I want to tell you about Bob Jennings. Starting on the pump application desk in 1976, Bob has worked in sales, repair, and troubleshooting pumping systems for more than 44 years. Bob currently oversees the Hydro's Pump Optimization Initiative for high-energy pumps and also is the training instructor for Hydro Inc. He has been presenting a series of training seminars that Hydro has been offering to its customers for the past 15 years and is also a qualified instructor for Pump Systems Matters course, Pumping System Optimization, Opportunities to Improve Lifecycle Performance. And today we're going to talk about Hydro University. We're going to tell you what that is and why it's important, but we're also going to talk about the role that training plays in building the factory of the future. So now, without any further delay, I'm really excited to welcome Mike and Bob to the podcast. Gentlemen, welcome. It's great to have you here.
Hello, Michelle. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having us.
And I want to jump right in because I know that you both have very interesting stories to tell. I mean, I read your bios, but tell us just a little bit more about your professional background and about your experiences in manufacturing. And particularly, maybe we could talk about how manufacturing has changed in the last 40 some odd years that you've both been in the industry. Mike, why don't you start?
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. As you had mentioned, I had started out in engineering, designing pumps for the submarine program. I went into marketing, and pretty soon it was obvious that they wanted me to go away from the factory so I wouldn't be a disturbance. So they put me in sales. And that's where I started to realize the importance of working with customers focused on their goals and their needs. And that has followed me throughout my career, and especially as a consultant, where our sole purpose was to try and figure out how to reduce the cost base of these customers by solving problems. Non-availability is a big issue with any customer because it basically means that you can't get the product out the door and you can't get money. So trying to figure out how to make pumps more available and to increase their life cycle is a huge concern of customers. And what we're finding out lately is that that's where their focus is. They're into pump health evaluations or equipment health evaluations. And many of our customers are building their base to include risk assessors. One of the great questions that always comes up is, what is the risk of my running my equipment until my next scheduled work period? What has been exciting for me is getting involved in those discussions and those analyses. And that's why, to me, it's such a blessing working with Hydro, because they're an independent company. They're an unbiased company. And their sole mission since their inception has been to work with customers to support them in increasing the reliability and the operation of their equipment. So a lot of the initiatives that Hydro has done, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, has been focused to reducing the cost base of their customers. We'll get into discussions later on, but it's important to note that where the customers used to be, and I think Bob can talk a little bit more about this, is that they were always focused on reducing the cost of goods and supply. So they'd be going out for competitive bids and trying to get the lowest cost to either do a repair or to buy new equipment. But that savings is minuscule to the tremendous costs that they have in keeping equipment available and reducing maintenance costs, either due to maintenance errors, which are growing. We'll talk about that a little bit, or because they're not operating that long. I mean, the mean time between repair, which is a good discussion point, is very low compared to the capable mean time between repair of this equipment. My career has been really focused in working with customers to do just that, to try and understand what their problems are and to come up with solutions that are actionable that is going to save them money.
Bob, we were talking earlier about some of the changes that have happened in recent years with regard to manufacturing and how it's changed and how the landscape looks so different now than it did a while back. So can you speak to that? And also you can tell us a little bit more about your background and kind of your driving mission.
Sure. I joined the Hydro organization back in 1976, fresh out of engineering school, and started off in the application desk. To put things in perspective, that was back in the day when I was using slide rules, add and subtract calculators, and mimeograph machines to photocopy things. And so that's kind of where we started off. I jokingly tell people I'm still in the industry right now because I'm doing penance for all the misapplied pumps that I did over the years. Because
Right.
by today's standards, Michelle, we would not be doing things the way we did back in the 70s and in the 80s. Technology has just really moved things forward. The things that a lot of people today take for granted, the CNC machinery, the CAD software, that wasn't available when a lot of these systems that are still in operation today were first put in place. And so a lot of what we're focusing on is to go back in there and, dare I say, correct the mistakes that we made, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Technology is just moving so rapidly that some of the things that I was bragging about 5 years ago are obsolete today. It's becoming harder and harder to keep abreast with how rapidly technology is just moving us forward. It's not just technology for the sake of technology, it's the practical applications and the implications of those as they're implemented on the factory floor or in the design process, etc.
Bob brings up a very good point. It's important to note that the markets that we serve are markets where the plants were basically built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. So many of the plants that are out there are, 20, 30, dare say 40 years old. They're still operating. And the equipment, obviously, were purchased back in the 70s and 80s. And those pumps, to Bob's point, were designed without the availability of the technologies that we have today. So there was no computational fluid dynamics to figure out two-phase flow. There was no finite element analysis to figure out the stresses in the pump. And many of these pumps were modeled off of much smaller pumps where we didn't even consider the energy density of the fluid and the impact that it would have. So, the bottom line is that a lot of the pumps, if not most of the pumps that are installed in almost all the plants today are of that vintage, and they all have, each configuration has what we call fatal flaws. The things that we had no knowledge of, we didn't have any operating experience of. And as a result of it, these pumps fail. The problem is that in the past, the customers didn't care. They built Band-Aids around it. Oh, that pump only lasts 4 years. Hey, Bob, make sure we have spare parts for 4 years from now, we got to replace that pump. Right? And the technology today allows these pumps to operate 15 years. So you can imagine the cost savings for not having to maintain a pump. And like you take a car to the dealership. How many times have you taken the car to the dealership to get an oil change and it comes back and all of a sudden something goes wrong because somebody's had their hands in their car, right?
That's right.
One of the evolutions that has changed is that now customers are starting to say, hey, maybe we need to cut our cost base. We're in a competitive environment. We're not making the profits we used to. Where can we cut costs? And one of the areas is in extending the life of the equipment. Mm-hmm. But we have to realize that the equipment that they have in these plants, right, the design basis of that equipment is not solid, right? It's fraught with these problems that with the technology today can be resolved. People don't understand that. They think, wow, that's a pump. That should work.
You bring up such an interesting point because, as you guys know, what Hydro does best is taking these super old pumps that have been out there for decades and kind of refurbishing them and rebuilding them and putting them out there like they were brand new. I can remember an article I wrote about a pump that Hydro repaired that was 80 years old and it's still working. So when you think about these old pumps and other equipment too, all the equipment surrounding the whole pumping system that's out there, that's outdated, but then we're putting this new technology, attaching automation to it. How's that working out? Can these old pumps handle this new automation?
Not always. And a lot of times we get enamored with the potential cost savings without doing the rudimentary work that needs to be done to see whether that piece of equipment would lend itself to this newer variable speed operation, etc. In my career, I started doing the training almost as a self-preservation. I came up through the ranks, where I was just trying to service my customers, was always on the front line. I got that 2:00 a.m. emergency call out because a pump had failed. So we would bring the equipment in. The focus, as Mike said, is always just get it back online, get the production back up and running. After having done that 2 or 3 or 4 times, you begin to go, wait a minute, let's not keep doing the same thing that we've been doing that's causing this equipment to fail. And as I started working with our customers, I recognized that a lot of the people that I was dealing with, they knew the basic functions of a pump, but they didn't understand how a pump interacted with the system, and that when you do something downstream from a pump, it has a direct impact on how that piece of equipment is going to operate and the reliability of it. We've always believed that knowledge is our best ally, and if we can get our customers to understand the overall system approach to pumping equipment, then maybe we can get them to stop repeating these same operational upsets that was causing the equipment to fail.
I think that's a great point. I love what you said about knowledge is our greatest ally. What a great quote that is. I think I'll never forget that. And it's a great segue into talking a little bit about Hydro University. So we all know that Hydro is a worldwide aftermarket service and repair company. But recently, Hydro University has come on board. And I'm wondering if you guys can just introduce us to Hydro University and tell us why it was so important to create this training resource. And you may have already answered it by saying knowledge is our best ally, but I would like it if you guys could go a little bit deeper into why this training resource and this training center, really, Hydro University, was created. We'll start with you, Mike.
Sure, thanks, Michelle. First of all, I want to say that, and this is a takeoff of what Bob is saying, Hydro's been training customers for over 25 years. But why Hydro University? Hydro University really is part of a myriad of products and services that our owner, George Harris, decided was extremely important to support customers in reducing their total cost base. And once again, that wasn't based on buying pumps cheaper, buying repairs cheaper. This was to really attack the high cost silos that they had. And those were maintenance errors, all right, non-availability of equipment, and parasitic energy costs. Those are the 3 areas that are killing customers as far as losing profitability and being uncompetitive with other people in their industries. So why Hydro University is that we felt that to achieve the reduction in maintenance errors, to achieve the increase in availability, to reduce energy costs, there had to be a knowledge transfer so that they understood what the problem was and what the solution is. What compounded the problem was that, like I said, a lot of these plants are aging, right? They're not building new plants, so a lot of the people in those plants are aging as well. A lot of the people that you'll see in a plant are in their 50s and 60s. There are not that many people that are in their 20s and 30s at these plants because it's not an exciting field when you look at it. And so a lot of these people are retiring, and the institutional knowledge from these people retiring is immense. I know Bob is going to talk about that. It's a favorite subject of his.
Yeah, I think we should talk about this because it's such an issue. I started covering industrial processing industries about 12 or 13 years ago. And back then, it was a big topic of conversation, this closing the manufacturing skills gap. And we're still talking about it. It has not been resolved. So, Bob, tell us a little more about that. We talk about this a lot, and it is important to the future of manufacturing to get the new generation of pump experts and manufacturing experts up to speed to where these older guys are.
Oh, I think that's unfortunately it's getting progressively worse. I mean, we're losing all that tribal knowledge that goes out the plant door when somebody retires. Again, when I started 40 years ago, we don't have the luxury of having the apprentice programs that were in place where you would take a new hire under your wing for 2 to 3 years and gradually get him accustomed to the systems that are out there that are essential to keep the plant operating. And so we've lost that. And nowadays people are expected to hit the deck running to be productive from day two. You know, day one was spent filling out the forms, and day two was, here's the keys to the plant, keep it running. One of the things that Hydro U is trying to focus on is to be a one-source place for learning about pumps and pumping systems that goes beyond simply the basic hydraulics and fluid mechanics that we learned about in college. I still remember that transition coming from engineering school onto that application desk. You know, they talk about a learning curve. I felt like I hit the brick wall, you know, as far as going from the chalk dust theory that we learned about in college to the practical application. What we focus on with Hydro U is the practical application of not only pumps, but pumping systems. So much of the training that was available in the past, Michelle, was a sales pitch on features and benefits that was masquerading as a training program. Not everybody has the opportunity to start off with a clean sheet of paper and design a brand new system. So what do you do with my system? What do you do with my pumps? How can I improve that? And so that's the niche that we're trying to fill here, is to get on the practical application side of it for improving existing systems, not designing a brand new one.
That's an important point. Like we said, Hydro's been training for 25 years. There are a lot of companies that have been training customers. The feel for training back then, and from the customer viewpoint, from human resources, you know, continuing education was a checkbox. We need to train our people. You know, let's bring in the pump guy. You know, he'll provide, you know, a 2-day training program. To try and discuss something that is really poignant and something that's going to have an effect on their business in a 2-day period is ludicrous. I mean, it's just not going to happen. Most of the information was general knowledge, and that general knowledge would try and motivate the people to some actionable items. But to tell the truth, they were there just to get away from their jobs for 2 days and learn something. That landscape has changed tremendously. Now the customers realize that they're losing that knowledge base, and they're scared of it because with that lack of knowledge base comes all the errors that we talked about. You know, and all of a sudden their costs are geometrically growing. All of a sudden the maintenance errors are geometrically growing. All of a sudden the root cause analysis that was done by their engineering team is inadequate or erroneous, which causes more problems. So here they are at the crossroads saying, what am I going to do with this? We had to step back and say, look, what's the purpose of our training? Why develop Hydro University? And we made a pact. We said, you know what? We're not going to teach academia. Who cares what the shaft stress is? Is that important to their job? No. Who cares what the impeller inlet and exit angles are? Is that important to their job? No. More simply, who cares what a performance curve is? You know, what are they going to do with a performance curve? All right. So we said, what we're going to do is we're going to teach customers on how to do their job, not our job, not design the pumps, not any of that. So what we focused on is that, look, we have two groups of people. Basically, we have maintenance technicians and we have engineers. All right. And now we have these problems that the customer has, which are maintenance errors. All right. Pumps that are not running long enough, and pumps that they need to evaluate the health and the risk for running further. So how do we teach those customers how to do their jobs? Right? What's important to them is, how do I replace a bearing? How do I replace a seal properly? What is necessary to get them to be proficient at their job again and to replenish that institutional knowledge that has gone out the door through retirement or because they're reducing their headcount? So all of a sudden, this was a process, all right? We said, where do we want to go with this, right? And so one of the first steps is that we need to certify the maintenance people. Well, that's a great idea. If they're certified, then their management can say, hey, I got this pump problem over here. Who do I have that I can work on? Oh, hey, this guy's certified over here. He's certified at level 1. And I've got a level 3 over here. He can supervise them. And if I got a 24/7 work period and I've got an outage, I got to put teams together. So now I have people that are certified to do that work. So, my risk of having something go wrong during that exercise has been reduced. Right. So that's the first thing we started with, is certification. And what are the steps necessary where if you were an insurance company or you were one of these, branding companies, you say, how am I ensured that the guy is certified?
Yeah, I would love to hear what Hydro University looks like. Is it on-demand courses? Is it live training? Tell us exactly what it is.
The short answer is yes, and all that.
Kind of give us a rundown of what it looks like, but then also respond to Mike's thoughts about why it's so important.
We've been focused on training for quite some time. All of our service centers have dedicated training centers in there so that we can bring the training to the customer rather than bringing the customer to a central facility and train them there. We've done that to facilitate that. And so long before COVID hit, we had a schedule of scheduled trainings for each of the centers throughout the North America and the world. And then all of a sudden COVID hit. And there was no more travel, and there was no more customer interaction. And so that forced us to take something that had been done in a classroom environment and transpose that over to an online platform. It's been a steep learning curve, but we've done that very, very well. And we're utilizing a lot of the latest graphics, such as Cortana and LMS, that actually enables the online classes, permits the participant to interact with the software so that it's interactive. You can take a pump in a 3D model and take it apart yourself and see how these components come together. When we do the live seminars, you've got a wealth of talent that brings to the table, 20, 30, 40 years worth of hands-on experience to facilitate that learning process. Yes, we offer scheduled online classes that are open to the participants. We also have on-demand classes. Then we offer what we call blended classes, to where somebody would take an online class, but then that same week that they took that class, there'd be a scheduled period to where the instructor for that particular seminar topic is available to discuss and answer questions with the participants.
I think this is really a unique feature of this, because you see a lot of online classes and courses you can take, but to actually be able to interact, and as you guys know better than anybody, every situation is different, right? So if it's an oil and gas application in, saltwater environment, that's very different than wastewater application in the desert. So it's very specific questions that these students of Hydro University would be asking. One answer doesn't answer the same question, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's one of the things that we've endeavored with Hydro U, is that we don't possess in-house all of the knowledge that we need. So we've gone out and contracted with some of the industry experts like Heinz Block, who's very, very well known. And he teaches one of our modules on bearings and bearing design, etc. And so it's not focused just on pumps per se, but we're going to the whole system. We'll talk to motors. We'll talk to couplings. We'll talk to base plates and grout and foundation. We'll talk to piping. We'll talk to valves. Really, we're trying to develop that one source to where you can get quality education. I like to tell people I teach physics, not product features and benefits.
Right.
So
yeah,
this
that's
is
good.
physics can be applied to I don't care whose brand name it is on the nameplate. It can be applied to any piece of equipment. And so that's really what we've been trying to do. It's been a daunting endeavor, but we're well down the road in developing new content. We try to come up with another module each month.
Mike, tell us a little bit about some of the different courses that are offered. Bob said in general that, he speaks to motors and couplings and seals and pumps and whatever. But give us an idea of some of the specifics that are covered in some of these.
That's a great question, Michelle. But we used to teach general knowledge, and now we're teaching what's important for customers to do their job and to become more profitable. Our training platforms, and as you go through it, for example, Heinz Block on bearings, is he going to teach how a bearing is designed? Who cares, right? But what he's going to teach about is why a bearing fails. How do you set up the tricle oiler properly? Take a bearing apart and, based on the forensic analysis that you do, how can you determine what caused that bearing to fail to begin with? So we have a course on bearings. Why? Because normally when pumps go down, they go down because the bearings fail or the seals fail. So we have a course on seals. And so we've contracted through John Crane to provide a very specific training course that, once again, provides the elements of how a seal is designed, but really talks about why a seal fails and how you can prevent a seal from failing. Because once again, what is our goal? Our goal is to support customers to increase the operating life of this equipment. And unfortunately, mechanical seals get a bad rap because they seem to be the one that's always failing. But it's the tail wagging the dog. The pump causes the seal to fail. The seal doesn't fail by itself. So we have to teach these customers on what's important for the survivability of that seal. So that's a course. Then we have courses on troubleshooting. So we have a vibrations course. Do they need to know, what's amplitude and what's velocity and acceleration? No, what they need to know is based on a spectrum that they see, what are the probable causes that would result in that spectrum? And what do they do about it? And then we have one on, because there are aging plants, what are the different types of diagnostic tools out there to help you understand what's going on with the pumps and what's causing them to fail? So there's things like operating deflection shapes and operating modal analyses and things that you do in the plant to understand, is my foundation sound? Is the piping set up to provide stresses? Am I exciting an acoustic resonance in the system? And all that's important because, to your point, Michelle, these plants are changing. Not only are they changing because they're old, right? But they're changing because all of a sudden the amount of product that they're trying to get out the door has changed. They're either increasing their output or reducing their output, or a lot of these electric plants are now going into, they're not base loaded anymore, they're peaking. And that puts a whole different element of failure modes on the pumping systems themselves. So we talk about that. We have a course on generic failure modes, so they can understand what these fatal flaws of these old designs are and what are the upgrades that technology has provided, so that when they take a pump out of service to repair it, instead of just to what Bob said before, just to repair it, to put it back in so it fails again in the same amount of time, what can they do to increase the life of that equipment? It's laughable because the incremental cost to do these upgrades is insignificant, and the benefits go throughout the survivability of the plant. So if the plant's designed for 40 years life, if you put that upgrade in, it'll survive for 40 years and you'll get the benefits for it. So we teach that. For every element of the pump, we talk about what's important to understand, why it fails, and how to prevent it from failing. And then we talk about what you can do to extend the life and what you can do to understand the health of that equipment and to be able to evaluate the risk of operating it to the next work stoppage. That was the number one question I got asked at 16 years as a consultant. Hey, Mike, we got this pump. Can it last till September? Let's take a look at the data, right? And that data, with all the digital systems that are out there, and all of a sudden artificial intelligence, and it's changing dramatically, right? But you have to have knowledge of how to use this. One of the things that Hydro went into was providing condition monitoring to get continuous data. You cannot evaluate the risk of running further unless you have data, right?
That's
So a lot
right.
of these companies are struggling. Hey, let's put sensors on the pump, and we can have these wireless sensors, and they're all put into a Pi system. We can look at the data. But then what do you do with the data?
Right. That's such a great point. And to Bob's earlier point, if knowledge is our ally, then data really is our weapon. And the analysis is how we solve the problems. Do you guys agree with that?
Oh,
Reasonable
absolutely.
Yeah,
interpretation of what we're talking about here.
I love that line. That's a great. I'm going to use that line.
Well, good. I'm just curious though. It sounds to me, and just let me know if I'm hearing this correctly. It sounds to me that Hydro University is less about the X's and O's of how a pump or how the equipment works, and more problem solving and real world scenarios and real things that can happen in a facility that can take equipment out, and this is how you get it back up.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the courses that we're in the process of developing right now, Michelle, is inspection guidelines. So when a pump fails, there's a lot of traces as to why it failed. So when you take a pump out of service and you're going to do an inspection, what's the critical components? What are the critical areas that you're looking for? How can you do a forensic analysis of the individual components to tell the story as to why this piece of equipment failed and where the areas need to be improved? It could be operational. It could be in some design modifications to the piece of equipment. But that's something that you're not going to get in a textbook at a university.
Right.
You're only going to acquire that through years and years of experience in learning what are the critical fits in a piece of equipment. So we're developing that for OH1, OH2, BB1, BB2, BB3, BB5, VS1, so that if you've got people that are charged with that responsibility, whether it's in-house or you're sending the equipment out, here's some of the insight. Here's hundreds and hundreds of years of tribal knowledge that we're putting down in these courses to streamline the process. Because, Michelle, as we talked earlier, we're on information overload. How do you separate the signal from the noise? I think the technology where it's moving in the future is going to be in AI and in the algorithms that are used to take this overwhelming thousands and hundreds of thousands of streams of data that are coming at you and find out what you need to concentrate on. As Mike said, that's why we developed the condition monitoring, because I've been out in the field and they've been taking vibration readings, and they'd go along on a red route basis to take vibration readings. And it's overwhelming data that the frontline mechanic or millwright doesn't have the time to sort through. And it sits in his inbox and becomes an important document when the equipment fails, because now we can go back and really digest what was in those reports. So if we can get software and algorithms to be able to sift through the thousands and thousands and thousands of bits of data that we're getting and give you the important information, that's where the future is going to lie.
You made a great statement. You said the pump training in the past has been the X's and the O's of how a pump works, right? Well, Hydro University is into the Y's and the P's of how a pump doesn't work. That, if I could put it in a sense, that's what we're teaching. Bob brought up inspections. Inspections are incredibly important, all right? Because number one, it's an opportunity to learn something. And number two, it's an opportunity to change something. It's funny, we've been in that business, as you know, for years and years and years. In fact, Hydro pioneered the business by coming up with the 300-point data process of inspecting equipment. And why? Why did we do that? We did that so that when you take a pump apart, you're taking enough data so that when it goes back into service, right, it won't fail because of something that you missed. I mean, it's like taking your car to the dealership and having an oil change and they didn't take a look at the brake linings. And you're taking the car back and all of a sudden your brakes fail. You're into a car crash. These pumps are operating for, years, right? And they're subjected to loads. Just to take a pump apart and to do a cursory inspection and put it back together is not doing the customer justice, because something might have happened during that operating time that puts stresses on the component so that when you put it back in, it's just imminent to fail. Teaching a customer about how to specify a repair, what's important, what are the important dimensional things that they have to check out? What are the visual things? What is the non-destructive testing they have to do on each component to say to yourself, okay, this component is satisfactory for reuse, right? And it
Right.
goes well beyond what most people do when they do an inspection. Bob has championed that. He has spent hours and hours and hours putting together a very informative inspection training platform that, once again, the sole purpose is to help customers in not having problems in the future. We're in the Y's and the P's, not the X's and the O's.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that's a great way to explain it. So we've got an idea of what Hydro University is and what it looks like and how the courses are, a little bit of a taste of what some of the courses. And I will have some links in the show notes that people can actually go straight to it. And I think we have a discount, 25% discount we're going to give to podcast listeners, but I'll get to that at the end. But before we do, I want to just get a statement from each of you. We've talked about how training has evolved and how it used to be and how it is now with this new development of something like Hydro University. From your perspective, what does training look like for the future? Where is it going? And what is the role of training in Factory of the Future? And we'll start with you, Bob, and then I'll let Mike come in and respond too.
Michelle, I think the training of the future is unlimited. As we discussed earlier, platforms that are being available for us to facilitate training is changing week by week. Some of the training modules that we were developed a year ago have been deemed obsolete. I think more and more corporations out there are recognizing the cost benefit of getting proper training. It's become essential. What the future is, you need to get to focus on the quality of the training, specificity of the training required. And so what we try to do is break these modules up, and I'm sure that we'll have hundreds of different modules by the time we're finished, but they're targeted for specific needs so that you can take your frontline mechanic and send him to a lubrication training seminar so he understands that. You can take your supervisor and send him to a basic pump fundamentals so that he understands that. So it's going to be very, very targeted. Again, I just can't even begin to imagine with software improvements and the technology that's available what the future is going to hold. I'm not that much of a wizard to even predict.
I think one thing certain, we're going to need to continue to have training. The training itself is not going to become obsolete, obviously. What do you think, Mike? How do you see the future of training?
I think the future of training, number one, we have to look at the information that wants to be trained, but just as important is the process of how we deliver it, how it's communicated. I firmly believe that Hydro is on the right track. I believe that the information that customers are going to want to be trained to is how to support them in doing their job, how to increase the efficiency of their operation, how to reduce the cost base. Instead of these general knowledge training courses that don't really provide that much benefit, I think customers are going to look for laser-driven courses that increase the skill sets of their employees. Where I think it's going from there is how it's delivered. So, for example, the new hires for these customers are quite different from the old people like ourselves. All right?
Sure, absolutely. No question about that.
They're definitely more visual. I still have a 15-year-old and a 17-year-old, and PlayStation and Xbox is the world they live in, right. Texting and whatnot. So the delivery method is where we have spent a lot of time in developing YouTube on steroids to support.
That's so true.
To support the training. So we have these 3D, and our graphics department is tremendous. We have these 3D animations, and we've developed a system called Impel, which basically is like a YouTube. It's the assembly and disassembly of equipment, and it goes through an animation of it. So it makes it very easy to understand the interaction of these components, how you put them together. So where's training going? One of the issues that we have is still getting people for hands-on training, especially mechanics. I mean, you can learn something in a class, but mechanics, they work with their hands.
That's right.
Until they get their hands on something, right? They haven't completed their learning process. You can just see them having visors and having this information going to them and working on mock-ups. I believe that the information is going to be the information that we're providing today right? But the method of delivery will change dramatically.
I agree with that completely. And you see this in innovations like augmented reality, where an operator can put a tablet or their cell phone in front of a piece of equipment, and the inside of the equipment will just explode onto the screen and show them in 3D exactly where things are and how to fix them. And it's really high tech. And it's interesting because a lot of these young people coming into manufacturing or that should be coming into manufacturing don't know that they could really play a video game virtually all day if they get into manufacturing because of all this new technology. It's really
exactly. When you look at maintenance errors today, and Michelle, they are growing geometrically, and it's a real cause of concern. When you take a look at the total issue, is that the maintenance procedures themselves, as written, are fraught with error. They're generic in nature. They came from the OEMs. They're missing items. But all that was inconsequential because, to Bob's point before, the people who were doing the assembly and the disassembly and the maintenance work themselves were seasoned veterans that went through years of training. They said, what's written there is not right. This is the way to do it, right? But if you lose the institutional knowledge, and the procedures are wrong, it's an accident waiting to happen. That's why the maintenance errors have gone up so big. So when you look at Hydro, once again, our mission is to support the customers into increasing the efficiency of their operation and the reliability of their equipment. How do we help that customer? Well, one of them is by replenishing that institutional knowledge through training through Hydro University. The other one is by improving the maintenance procedure. Our management invested tremendously in coming up with a computer-based 3D animated maintenance procedure. This YouTube on steroids that is a tremendous visual representation of the written document. And not only that, it can be used in pre-job briefs so that there's total communication among the people to do the work. So that, they don't have a piece of paper and they're going down to the pump or the motor or the turbine, and they're taking it apart and they say, wait, well, what does this mean? Right? Well, they can see what it means. The delivery method is going to be key in future training.
So much to think about and so much to consider. It's going to be interesting to see where technology takes us. We're getting close to the end of the time, and I want to give you both a chance to give us your last word and your final thoughts. But first, I want to make sure that the listeners know that in the show notes, I have a link to the Pump Fundamentals course at Hydro University, and you can get 25% off of that course. And this is a big savings. This is a big deal. You just have to use the promo code Factory Future, and I'll put all this in the show notes so you don't have to write anything down. You can just click, and you'll be there. And then I also want to let everybody know that Bob has an upcoming webinar in August 4th and 5th on inspection guidelines. And Mike has a webinar coming up in September 15th and 16th on pump fundamentals. In late July, the 28th and 29th, there's a webinar on shaft alignment. And there's just so much coming up on Hydro University. You really should check it out. It's really a great resource. And as I said before, and as we discussed, it's more about problem solving and learning how to deal with issues that you're going to face out there in the real world than what you can learn in a book. So it's really exciting. So now, guys, first, I just want to thank you for being here. And then I want to give each of you the opportunity to wrap it up for us. Tell us your final thoughts on the role that training plays in building the factory of the future. And Bob, we'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you again, Michelle, for hosting this. I live by the adage that, somebody once told me, from the time you're born until you're 40, you take and you learn. And from 40 on, you teach and you give back. That's kind of where I'm at in my career. I really enjoy training. I think that's what makes Hydro U so unique, is that we've got enthusiastic instructors that are really excited. Each of us look for that eureka moment when we can see a student and finally goes, eureka, I get it. I understand how it all comes together. In my experience, you can tell somebody not to do something and they may or may not do it. But if you tell them not to do something because this is what's going to happen, then they'll grasp it and they'll understand it. And that's really what we're focusing on here, is to engage with the participants and develop those eureka moments. So we're excited. This is an exciting times that we live in. Technology is changing things rapidly. And boy, we're just really embracing that and looking for the opportunity to, as Mike emphasized to improve the equipment reliability, the efficiency, and reduce our customers' cost. And so Hydro U is just another facet of the Hydro Inc. corporate philosophy of engineering pumps for better performance.
Fantastic. Great. And Mike, what are your final thoughts?
I absolutely agree with everything Bob said. I would say that if you're a customer deciding what training course you want to take, there are a lot of them out there. What you want to do is, I think, you want to pick the training that's going to help you do your job. It's going to support you in being able to be more efficient at your job so that you can spend more time with your family. Who wants a pump to break?
That's right.
Let's face it, right? So there are a lot of companies out there. I can just tell you that Hydro is unbiased, that I feel like our goals are aligned to the customers, meaning that everything that we do is to increase the reliability and survivability of pumping equipment. So, instead of looking for a company that's going to teach you the X's and the O's, look for somebody like us who's going to teach you the Y's and the P's. Dot your I's, cross your T's, watch your P's and Q's, and choose us. We're gonna make it fun. That's one thing that we do, right, Bob?
Absolutely.
It sounds absolutely fun and so informative and useful. And anytime you can help end users solve problems, then you've struck gold. That's for sure. Thanks again, you guys, for being here. It's been my pleasure. And I just really appreciate you taking the time. I know the listeners will benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.